Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 12th of June, 2024, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me in the studio today, Charles Malet. Welcome to the programme, Charles.
Thank you very much, Mike.
And from Damascus, we have Vanessa Beeley. We're going to get started. I know we said we weren't going to cover the election, but I just saw this quote from Grant Shapps this morning, and I thought we had to laugh at it for comedy value at least. You want to make sure that in this next government, whoever forms it, there's a proper system of accountability. How much accountability has there been in the House of Commons for the last lot of years, Charles?
I think it's a round number.
A round number, that being zero. And you don't want to have somebody receive a supermajority, he says. I couldn't agree with that last statement more, of course. We don't want anybody, certainly none of the mainstream parties, to be there with a supermajority or any kind of majority, because, of course, there is no accountability, no opposition in the House of Commons at all. And we'll be hearing a little bit from Andrew Bridgen on this later on. But Vanessa, let's move on to more serious stuff and get an update on what's been going on in Gaza.
Yes, unfortunately, yet another Zionist massacre carried out under the pretext of rescuing Israeli hostages, although reports from within Palestine have said also that they managed to kill 3 of the Israeli hostages, including a dual American passport holder, so effectively an American citizen. Reports right from the moment that this started sort of, hitting social media, troops hid inside an aid truck for deadly US-Israel operation in Nuseirat. Nuseirat is central Gaza, towards northern Gaza on the coastal area. So let's have a look at what Afshan Ratanzi of RT's Going Underground said about it, how the massacre unfolded. Israel used the US-built humanitarian pier to sneak in a unit of Israeli soldiers and reportedly American soldiers. The soldiers boarded a humanitarian aid truck and drove to the Nuseirat refugee camp. Once inside, they were discovered by Palestinians, which resulted in non-stop Israeli aerial bombardment and the soldiers opening fire inside the central market. This was 11 in the morning, so it was packed, killing, actually, we know now that it's over 274 Palestinian and injuring up to 700. So if we move on, this is from Al Jazeera. This is not from Al Jazeera. This is just a video showing that on the 7th of June, basically, the US reinstated the pier that we reported as having been washed upstream towards the occupied territories where the ships were moored and repaired. And then this is just a video of the Israeli helicopters taking off from the area next to the pier after the so-called rescue mission. And you can see that basically this pier is adjacent to the Nuseirat camp, so it would make absolute sense that this pier would be used to bring in the special forces, both American and Israeli. The air bombardment, as I said, started at around 11 a.m. in order to prepare the way for the special forces. This was actually confirmed. All of what I've just said was confirmed in Israeli media. If we just move on. So this was in Israel-Hamas in broad daylight in a... Sorry, have we missed a slide?
That's
it's me. Sorry. So here you have basically, again, it's Al Jazeera who collated a lot of testimony from civilians. This is just a report of the actual massacre.
نزلوا كأنهم يجيبوا مساعدات فلقوا المساعدات طبعا جنود وقوات خاصة بين منطقة فيها نازحين بين منطقة خيم. فواحد بقول أنا ما خلصت في الكلام هذا بقول هذول مش عرب هذول يهود. بعدين صار رمز قنبلة بعدين صار اشتباكات بعدين كمان قنبلة بعدين 16
يا رب يا رب الله أكبر يا رب.
طيارة تضرب عشوائي صارت تضرب في الدور صواريخ.
خلال 10 دقائق بقى عنا على باب الخيمة اللي بيننا وجنبنا
قال بدكاش تعترف غنحصرك على ولادك ونطلق لك ولادك. قلت له لا ندير بعترف انا لا بعرف مقاومه ولا عندي سلاح. في شي دقيقه راه الغرفه سمعت صوت طلاقنا. في اللحظه هذه كان طاح ولادي الاثنين. ابني استشهد عمره 12 سنه والثاني هذا ربنا يشفيه.
حوالي 14 مش ايش اقول لك اكثر من 14 في تحت الانقاض. الشوارع مليانه جدا.
Every report that I've read about this describes awful scenes, like literally a tsunami of blood, body parts everywhere. The fact that 274 people were massacred and 700 others injured. And of course, with the hospitals absolutely decimated in the area, it's impossible to treat them. Israel basically confirmed that in broad daylight in a furniture truck, how the IDF caught Hamas by surprise. US and Israeli media, of course, is declaring this a success. More than 1,000 Palestinians dead, dying, injured. 3 of their own hostages apparently killed, including an American citizen. Normally, this would be declared a failure. This, I think, is from Press TV. Again, the peer, the equipment, the personnel, all supporting that humanitarian effort had nothing to do with the Israeli military rescue operation. Pentagon spokesperson Patrick Ryder told reporters. He added that the Israeli operation, despite its proximity to the US floating dock, does not put American personnel at a greater risk. To underscore, the temporary pier on the coast of Gaza was put in place for one purpose only, to help move additional urgently needed life-saving assistance to Gaza. So the fact that he said that the Israeli military used a helicopter on a beach not far from the US pier to evacuate 3 of the captives and the soldiers that freed them. Hamas's comment on the attack, Israel perpetrated the Nuseirat massacre to block the ceasefire deal. And as it says in the article in The Cradle, so basically they're talking about the proposed ceasefire deal. They're talking about America's responsibility alongside Israel. But also there has, in the last 24 hours, been a report in the New York Times and in Ynet, Israeli media, also demonstrating that the UK and the US were involved in intelligence gathering prior to the massacre. And then if we're talking about this peace deal, I just want to show Matthew Miller, the US State Department spokesperson, talking about the most recent Biden peace plan.
On Friday, President Biden outlined a proposal for an immediate ceasefire to the war in Gaza. Let me take a minute to break down its terms. In phase 1 of this proposal, there would be a full and complete ceasefire, an end to the death and destruction that has torn so many lives apart. Israel would withdraw its forces from all populated areas in Gaza. The hostages, who have been separated from their families for more than 240 days now, would be reunited with their loved ones. We would surge humanitarian assistance into Gaza, 600 trucks a day. And then, in phase 2 and phase 3 of the proposal, all of the hostages would come home. Working with our partners in the international community, we would launch a major reconstruction effort in Gaza to rebuild homes and neighborhoods and schools that have been destroyed through this war. And we would work to set the conditions for durable peace between Israel and Palestine. Hamas should accept the deal now. The proposal that the president outlined on Friday is nearly identical to one that Hamas said it would accept just a few weeks ago. The only thing standing in between the people of Gaza and an immediate ceasefire is Hamas. It's time for Hamas to accept this deal and alleviate the suffering of the Palestinian people.
I mean, I don't know if you find that as extraordinary as I did, but there's not one mention there of Israel should accept the deal. The release of the hostages, of course, he doesn't mention the 9,000 plus Palestinian hostages being held extrajudicially in Israeli jails and also being abused and tortured, as we're seeing on a regular basis when prisoners are released back into Gaza. And the fact that it has been said that the US is now offering $400 million for rebuilding Gaza, while in reality we know that it's US bombs that have basically obliterated Gaza and massacred tens of thousands of Palestinians, 50% of which are children, and offered, obviously, it's also provided billions in weapons and funding to Israel, not only since the 7th of October, but also prior to. So all of this, in my opinion, is a lot of electioneering by Biden's administration to try and whitewash their role in the Israeli genocide in Gaza and in the occupied territories. And then while Hamas has officially accepted the peace deal, as it did about a week and a half ago, Israel has, from yesterday, refused it. And in reality, what they're now saying is that Biden's ceasefire plan allows the IDF to destroy Hamas. There is no wording to that effect in the peace plan. So as usual, we have seen since this plan was put forward, Israel increase its attacks on defenseless Palestinians inside what is effectively an open-air death camp. And guess what? Since the attack, the World Food Programme halts its aid distribution from the US-built Gaza pier because of security risks. So yet again, who is the loser in this? 1,000 dead and injured Palestinians and the starving Palestinians whose access to humanitarian aid is now being completely cut off.
Okay, Vanessa, thank you for that. Charles, let's come back onto the topic of Sam Melia.
Thank you, Mike. Good afternoon, all. Yes, last week I spoke about Sam Melia, who you will recall is being imprisoned in HMP Hull at the moment for offences that have been cast in such a light as to make him appear to be a lone extremist. And the latest development as of a few weeks ago was that he was denied access of any kind to his children. That included not having any photographs, not even being able to talk to his wife Laura on the telephone about the children, lest she be struck off as a contact of his. So further to that piece on the news last week, Laura has put out a message on her Telegram channel, which I will just read out to you. I've just received a call from Sam Melia in HMP Hull. His probation officer has just informed him that they've been inundated with letters and emails complaining about Sam not being able to have any contact with his children. As a result, they've decided to remove all but one of the restrictions. This means that Sam can now receive photographs of his children, receive letters from his children, talk to his children on the telephone, talk about his children. Of course, omitted is that he is unable to receive visits from his children. However, HMP Hull have advised they only haven't removed this because they legally aren't allowed to, as an assessment has already started to take place. This means the assessment is already moving forward, so hopefully the final restriction will be lifted very soon too, all being well. Now, the reason I've highlighted legally aren't allowed to is because one wonders, as per the document that I went through last week, why they were legally allowed to do this in the first place, since his supposed offences had absolutely no bearing on children, especially not his own children, and the threshold for denying access to children is not only high, but is supposed to be reviewed continually in order to ensure that a situation like this does not happen. So with that in mind, I think we'll just look a little bit further into how the criminal justice system is performing at the moment. And these statistics are woefully out of date, but that's the way of it with many government publications. So although this is dated 25th of April 24, this is actually from 2022, and it just concerns re-offending and really whether or not the criminal justice system in its current iteration is actually fit for purpose. So the overall re-offending rate was 25.8%. Now, you may be aware of such statistics. That may not come as a surprise, but I think for the general population, that is an outstanding failure of the criminal justice system. So to break it down further, adult offenders had a reoffending rate of 25.4%, juveniles had a reoffending rate of 33.33%, and adults released from custody or starting court orders had a proven reoffending rate of 33.4%, and quite staggeringly, adults released from custodial sentences of less than 12 months had a reoffending rate of 56.1%, and yet we're in a situation where we've reported several times now that Sam Melia was imprisoned in order to be made an example of. However, whilst the Ministry of Justice might not have certain things sort of dealt with, it is at least ready to publish statistics on the diversity of the judiciary. So we wait for those to come out in July of this year. And pertaining to the wider narrative, which of course is the sort of the pushing of the window in which people are captured by the definition of extremism. I'm going to play a short clip now from Nigel Farage, who of course has made quite a splash with his general election campaigning. And this is what he said to Sky News.
The problem that I'm talking about is a separate problem of 18 to 24-year-old young Muslims who are born in this country who increasingly are being radicalized.
Do you understand why people have found those comments uncomfortable, to say the least? Why it has been, taken on by people, you say you're not racist, but it has been used by people who are racist to fuel their arguments?
I'm not interested in those people, and thank goodness in this country they are a tiny minority fringe. All I'm doing is stating an obvious truth that makes people in Britain feel very, very uncomfortable.
Now, there are a lot of issues with that, not least the fact that Farage cannot substantiate such a claim. Secondly, what does he think the result of it will be? Further division or not? To suggest that people should be fearful of a particular age group, of a particular sector of society, or indeed ethnicity, is extremely irresponsible, I would put it. But furthermore, it's conflating the issue of perhaps genuine radicalization or threat, and the idea that somebody like Sam Melia, who simply published a bunch of stickers, could be put into the same category, or indeed put on opposing sides of a fence and made to be look like they are at serious loggerheads with one another. And I should just point out that Farage, an opportunist certainly, has just put out on Twitter an accusation that he has identified somebody who threw what may have been a rock at him within the last couple of days. And it's very clear from photographic and video footage that he has completely misidentified the person in question. Of course, this has been retweeted, and with a following as large as Farage's. It's now on him to clarify this as quickly as possible. But it just goes to show how in these times, particularly with the lead up to a general election, people can put stuff out. Once it's out there, you very rarely ever hear the clarification of it. So it's a very, very significant issue. And I'll just finish off by saying that the clip I showed with Laura Towler last week was part of a longer interview, and that will be out on the UK Column website soon. So please do keep an eye out for that.
Thank you, Charles. Now let's move on to some good news, and with respect to net zero policy at least, and we're going to Exeter for this. Now, there's been a long-standing campaign because Exeter has been running a pilot programme for safer streets. So of course they are talking about low traffic zones or no traffic zones in this case. Naturally, the Green Party has been out to demand that the streets are all shut down, stop the cars travelling. We call on Exeter councillors to resist suspending the active streets trial in the various parts of Exeter that was taking place. It must be allowed to run its 18-month course as originally planned. But in fact, there was a really huge opposition to this in the area. And this is just one typical tweet. So the catchphrase they were using was "Stop the Block." Exeter stop the block. If you want an example of community not involved or consulted on the low traffic neighbourhoods, look no further than the current trial in Exeter. Hugely unpopular and ignored pleas of the elderly, infirm, workers and businesses, poor public transport, huge delays on arterial roads. So they held, I'll bring that back. There was a meeting held in Exeter a couple of days ago, and well, it all seems to have gone very well for the naysayers because Exeter has now decided to drop the scheme. So let's have a look at this. This is their agenda and decisions for Exeter Highways and Traffic Orders Committee for Monday the 3rd of June. And this is what it says. The experimental traffic regulation orders associated with the various parts of Exeter are suspended as soon as practicable. The orders associated with some others are also suspended. Road narrowing paintings remain in place to slow down traffic. They are going to maintain the various traffic calming measures, as they describe it, and so on. But that is a win for anybody that has been arguing against the low traffic neighbourhoods and so on. So that's a positive development.
Certainly is a positive development. And I think that follows really with the Sam Melia case to show that public pressure does have a place. So to those who perhaps are sceptical about the idea of protesting, whether it be via sort of digital or written means, or actually getting out there and showing officials what you think, there is a place for it, and there are results.
Absolutely. Okay, let's move on. If you like what the UK column does, you'd like to support us, support.uk column is the place to go. Support.ukcolumn.org, I should say. We do need your financial support. If you can manage to join us, it's £5 a month at the moment. Please do. We do need that support. But if you can't do that, at least share the material you find on the various platforms, especially ukcolumn.org and ukcolumnextracts.co.uk. And a quick reminder that we're still not on Facebook. So if anybody's missing watching us on Facebook, there are other places to watch the UK Column news, most prominently the UK Column website itself, but also on Twitter and Odyssey and other places. So do follow us as you can and pick something up at the shop if you possibly can. Support us that way as well. Now, yesterday at 1 p.m, Debbie was interviewing James Roguski, and he was bringing everybody up to date on the 77th World Health Assembly. It's now finished, of course, everybody knows that, but he was bringing everybody up to date on that. If you haven't seen it yet, do watch it, do share it. That'd be very much appreciated. And yesterday, I spoke to Andrew Bridgen, and that interview will be going out at 1 p.m. tomorrow. So join us for that, 1 p.m. tomorrow, usual places, ukcolumn.org/live. But here is a short piece to camera that Andrew recorded yesterday, inviting people to come and assist with his efforts to a campaign in North East Leicestershire.
My name's Andrew Bridgen. I'm the independent candidate for North West Leicestershire. I've served as the MP since 2010. If you're able and willing to come and help on the ground in North West Leicestershire, you'd be extremely welcome. Please email to contact@abridgen.uk and my team will come back to you. We're out every day campaigning, delivering leaflets, and you'd be very welcome. You'd be striking a blow for democracy and direct democracy at that.
Yeah, sorry, of course, I should have said Northwest Leicestershire. Sorry about that. So if you can possibly help with that, please do contact Andrew Bridgen. Now let's move on then to health matters. And well, good news, or is it? Excuse my sarcasm, but let's bring this on screen because this is the European Medicines Agency. They have decided to authorize, or they had already authorized, zoonotic influenza vaccine from Sycaris. I'm not quite sure how you pronounce that exactly. This is a vaccine which is produced by this organization, CSL. So CSL, Sycaris, is a proud champion of pandemic preparedness, signs an agreement with the European Commission to provide pre-pandemic vaccines to the EU. So this is exactly like the bung that was given to the various pharmaceutical companies during COVID. So before they'd ever announced the development of a COVID vaccine, there were all kinds of contracts, all kinds of multi-million pound and multi-million euro deals being done with the big pharma companies for something which either hadn't received safety approval, hadn't even been developed yet, and so on. And they're doing the same thing again, this time with avian influenza. So if we bring that back on screen, let's just look and see what they had to say. 4 influenza pandemics have occurred over the past century, with the 1918 pandemic being the most severe in recent history, with an estimated mortality of up to 50 million people worldwide. Is that true? Well, there's plenty of debate around that. We'll talk about that in extra. So they say that strain-matched pandemic influenza vaccines are manufactured in response to the declaration of a pandemic. Pre-pandemic, also called zoonotic influenza vaccines, are available in the inter-pandemic period to help protect influenza strains with pandemic potential. These vaccines can be deployed under government guidance to mitigate the risk of an outbreak or provide a first line of defense in advance of a pandemic vaccine if a pandemic were to be declared. So that's fantastic, isn't it? They are preparing for the next pandemic, which is, they claim, going to be related to avian flu. Now, the question is, what's the situation in the UK? Well, the MHRA has this document, Guidance on Strain Changes in Authorised COVID-19 Vaccines, and this was published on the 4th of March 2021. But this talks about, halfway down the article, it talks about antigen shift. They say usually via a reassortment of genes, creating a novel influenza virus with pandemic potential. This would imply that a new version of previously authorized vaccine would be decisively different to a previous version. Such a pandemic vaccine may differ from seasonal influenza vaccines, e.g. by the adjuvant that's used in order to provide strong and rapid protection already after the first dose, especially where such strains are poorly immunogenic. For pandemic preparedness, in a pre-pandemic setting, the manufacturing process and vaccine design for a pandemic vaccine can already be determined before the pandemic is declared, even without knowing the actual pandemic strain yet. This has prompted the development of the mock-up concept, generally termed pandemic preparedness vaccines, by which a vaccine is developed as a pre-pandemic vaccine, now termed zoonotic influenza vaccine, with a strain that's emerging and that may have pandemic potential. So there's lots of mays and maybes and possibilities and perhapses, but they are making sure that the bungs keep going to the big pharma companies. I mean, why people should be out on the streets about this. There are many, many reasons why people should be out on the streets, but we are passing millions, if not billions of pounds every year to these companies for something which may never happen unless it's engineered to happen. And of course, a lot of that is through mainstream media propaganda. But it's quite an incredible situation, isn't it? That avian flu is being promoted as the next pandemic already.
It is, absolutely. I mean, we've dealt with this over a number of weeks now. I mean, from what you've just read, it's hard to believe that even the people writing it really have any conviction behind it.
Well, they should have a conviction.
Well, they should. but no, you're absolutely right. I mean, obviously, on the one hand, it's there to be ignored, but on the other, the sheer cost of it is absolutely phenomenal, and that is something that does need to be addressed. So is Grant Shapps true to his word about accountability?
Well, indeed. And of course, we need to point out that Debbie is skeptical about avian flu being the actual pandemic that gets called at the end of the day. She is of the view that this type of rhetoric is going to start to be applied with respect to antibiotics and so on, and antibiotic resistance. So we should make that point as well. But moving on from this then, Moderna is really excited because they have announced positive phase 3 data for combination vaccine against influenza and COVID-19. So the quote here is, combination vaccines have the potential to reduce the burden of respiratory viruses on health systems and pharmacies, as well as offer people more convenient vaccination options, which could improve compliance and provide stronger protection from seasonal illness. Moderna is the only company with a positive phase 3 flu and COVID combination vaccine. Building on the momentum of positive phase 3 data across the respiratory portfolio, we continue to address significant unmet medical needs and advance public health. Yes, okay, the less said about that, the better. But we should look now then at the Daily Mail, and they are attempting to place themselves as the mainstream media organisation of choice with respect to vaccine injury. So this headline is the latest. My son Adam, 41, had everything to live for, but he died after the AstraZeneca vaccine gave him a blood clot. Mail readers share stories of the deaths or health problems they fear were caused by the jab and their battles for compensation. Now, in the Mail's, and to be fair to the Mail, they did cover the issue of Nicola Shingler and her husband who had Guillain-Barré syndrome as a result of the AstraZeneca vaccine. But of course, they only did that after the UK column covered that story first. That was the story that got the UK column kicked off YouTube and Vimeo and other platforms. But of course, the Mail was not treated similarly by these platforms when they covered the story. So the fact that the Mail is now attempting to highlight these stories now, well, that on one sense is good. But of course, the Mail all the way through this was pushing out the pro-vaccine propaganda just as hard as anybody else at the same time. So then moving on from this, we just want to raise the issue of fluoridation again. And the reminder that there's a consultation going on with respect to North East England. So this is the open consultation community water fluoridation expansion in the northeast of England. It's updated on the 24th of April, but it's just a reminder that the 17th of June is the deadline for any submissions to this. So just to read what it says here, the Health and Care Act 2022 provides powers for the Secretary of State to introduce, vary and terminate community water fluoridation schemes. Before using these powers, public consultation is required on the proposal. So if you are interested in taking part in that consultation, the link to that will be in the show notes, of course, if you're on the UK Column website after the programme. And as I say, it closes at 11:59 p.m. on the 17th of June 2024. So do get that in the next couple of days. And we'll just remind you that we did cover this issue in March this year. Fluoride, the poison chalice in plain sight. This is Joy Warren. If you haven't seen that interview, have a look at that and share it if you can. Okay, let's move on then. Related in a certain sense, Charles, and land use.
It is very much related. And I start with a slide to make a clarification. An eagle-eyed viewer pointed out that the slide, which I used a couple of weeks ago, in which I was intending to point out the decrease in capacity, or at least energy generated from solar power. In actual fact, I've been looking at the sun too long, and I'd pointed at biomass. So what I should have shown to reflect solar was this, which does in actual fact show a marginal gain. But of course, we have to ask the question, at what cost to proper biodiversity and indeed food security? But to go back to biomass, which has of course seen a significant decrease, we should consider that in the light of the government's biomass strategy published last year in 2023, from which I've drawn out a small number of points. But just to make it clear that at the present moment, or at least at the time of writing, government estimates that there are 121,000 of hectares given over to providing feedstock for biomass, which, if you're not entirely familiar with it, is in effect burning wood or wood pellets or combustible materials that are in effect wood based, of course, at a time where we're told that we absolutely shouldn't be burning wood. Mike, sorry.
Yeah, can I just ask a question on that?
Yes.
How much of that is crop related or food related?
That's exactly what I want to come on and
Sorry.
deal with. So they, in amongst this, they plan to increase this area by approximately 17,000 hectares per annum. Of course, this largely gives over to a monoculture crop, being grown, and in most cases non-native, quick-growing species, which is absolutely running completely counter to the genuine sort of environmental movement, or indeed any of the government's espoused policies on, environmental transition. But critically here, and on the issue of food security, it does use arable land, and pertinent to Mike's question, this does use thousands and thousands of tons of sugar beet and wheat, not to mention other crops which could perfectly well be grown for human or at least animal consumption, but instead they are burned. Now, if you want to know more about this and the related technologies, I would point you back towards the UK Column website and a series of articles produced or written by Ian Davis last year. Are We Really at War? Nonsensical Sustainable Development, Parts 1 and 2, and Sustainable Renewable Energy, Neither Sustainable nor Renewable. But we talk a lot about the constraints on the population, which of course is increasing, a smaller amount of land being used for food production, and indeed the sort of contrived science that brings us a load of threats which we're told are the fault of climate change, but also us and our poor attitude or practices concerning biosecurity. So, of course, no great surprise to reintroduce at this point bird flu, or at least the zoonotic sort of version and shifting of bird flu. So here we have, updated just last week, confirmed findings of influenza of avian origin in non-avian wildlife. Now, as Mike points out, it's very easy to create the idea of a forthcoming pandemic with almost no evidence. And just to give an illustration of how this is being done at the moment, the confirmed findings go back to week 8 of 2023, since when there does not appear to be any evidence of a confirmed finding. Of course, I do caveat this by explaining once again that this is solely done by PCR test, which of course is in effect meaningless because it may not be used as a diagnostic tool either in a live or dead or laboratory cultured specimen. But further to that, the update from February, the non-avian wildlife, despite the government's desperation for evidence of it, they do say that there have been no further positive HPAI H5N1 detections in non-avian wildlife in GB. Now, with that in mind, it seems somewhat discordant to hear Jeremy Farrar at the World Health Organization talking in such terms. We'll just have a quick look at a video of him speaking within the last couple of weeks.
The great concern, of course, is that in doing so and infecting ducks and chickens, but now increasingly mammals, that virus now evolves and develops the ability to infect humans and then critically the ability to go from human to human transmission. And we know that in the rare cases, I think off the top of my head, 400 or 500 cases so far of humans, the mortality rate is extraordinarily high. So to me, this is a major concern. The current outbreak, for want of a better word, in America amongst cows is really concerning as well, and also talks to this issue of transmission. We have to understand in those cow settings, sheds, how H5N1 is transmitting, because it may be evolving into transmitting in different ways. Do the milking structures of cows create aerosols? Is it the environment which they're living in?
It's not an overstatement to say that he is there broadcasting to a worldwide audience, and he is literally making stuff up on the spot. He is putting forward rank hypotheses about whether or not something happens by aerosol and whether or not such a thing may lead to the deaths of many, many people. It's a complete, absolute out-and-out speculation.
You're suggesting he's a conspiracy theorist?
Well, I think I could suggest a lot of things, but what I think mainly what I suggest is that what he says does, of course, get picked up by all sorts of health agencies and all the rest of it, and before we know it, it does appear to be a sort of a going concern, as it were, that there is a pandemic or there is the threat of a pandemic, exactly like Mike's saying. The other thing I'd like to point back to from the previous document that we were looking at is, of course, the mention of anti-terrorism, which you might not think was particularly related to bird flu, but in actual fact, under the Anti-Terrorism Crime and Security Act 2001, what they call high pathogenic avian influenza viruses are a listed pathogen. But of course, that doesn't actually stop you from keeping hold of such things if indeed you believe that they do exist. You just have to make sure that you notify the correct authorities of your intention to hold pathogens and toxins. But this, of course, relates to the narrative that somehow food security and health security relates very closely to national security. And on that note, we just look at an recent article from Health Policy Watch, in which they announced that the United States has expanded bilateral pandemic preparedness measures and established a global health security coordinator post. Now, who is she and what did she say? She's called Dr. Stephanie Psaki, and the other day in an interview, she describes her role and strategy as being really important. And she says, we've seen that a lot of emerging pathogens are zoonotic diseases. If you take a look as well at the areas of partnership within the 50 countries, you'll see that zoonotic disease is a common area partnership because this is something that has been identified by many other countries. Well, how would this have happened without funding? And here we see the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation funding in August 2022, nearly $20 million for the Pirbright Institute, which of course supports vaccine manufacturing and innovation for neglected, tropical and zoonotic diseases of livestock. And hey presto, the next thing you know, you have such things coming to the fore, like of course the Pirbright Institute putting out information about blue tongue, which again we'll cover more again in the future, but we have dealt with earlier this year. And indeed, to sort of round things off, here's a tweet from the Met Office, or at least somebody who works for the Met Office within the last couple of weeks, saying, how do we at the Met Office use name atmospheric dispersion model outputs to help APHA, Animal and Plant Health Agency, and the Purbright Institute to conduct surveillance and control of blue tongue disease. Well, how indeed, and what really should we be making of all of this? This is something that we will continue to follow. As Mike says, Debbie Evans is very much highlighting the issue of what's being described as antimicrobial resistance. I think I would put it that it doesn't have to be one, effectively a sort of single focus show. I think that there are many things waiting in the wings that we all have to be very, very aware of. And of course, this is something that we'll continue to report on.
Thanks, Charles. Okay, Vanessa, let's go back to the Middle East. And there's been some movement on Syria, but also Turkey.
Yeah, so just a very quick update on Syria, because I've rather neglected it because of what's going on, obviously, in Palestine and Lebanon, and etc. There is a lot of movement suddenly in Syria, which does indicate a degree of weakness, perhaps, of the United States, of course, again, leading up to elections, but also with their investment in the genocide in Palestine and obviously in Ukraine also. So there is currently, the blue arrow is a current escalated military campaign, ground campaign, and artillery campaign in all of central Syria, so that entire area of what is effectively desert, against ISIS cells, terror cells, and factions that have sort of set up home in that area, of course, enabled and facilitated to do so by the Al-Tanf, circled in red, the Al-Tanf US illegal military base on the border there with Jordan. At the same time, there is a push to send troops down to the south, where Israel and the US have been fomenting a separatist movement around Dara and Sweda. Interestingly, there have been reports in Russian Telegram channels of Ukrainian soldiers being present in Dara. We haven't had that confirmed yet, but that would again suggest this sort of expansion of wars under the control of NATO. And sorry, if I can just go back to the map for 1 second, Mike. And then the yellow triangle in the northwest is an escalation and activity against the Turkish-backed and NATO-backed Al-Qaeda, various groups and organizations in Idlib in order to liberate the territory to the north of the main arterial road that goes from Aleppo to Latakia on the coast. So quite a lot of activity in Syria, and that is coinciding with the fact that Iraq now has stepped in to mediate or broker peace and normalization between Turkey and Syria. There is claims in Arab media in Al-Aqsa of a meeting in Baghdad soon. Of course, President Assad has always made it perfectly clear that there will only be normalization when Turkey ceases its annexation of Syrian territory and basically withdraws from Syria entirely. Now, interesting, at the same time, Turkey has requested to join BRICS. So let's have a look at the reasons that they state in this Middle East Eye article. Turkey's interest in an economic platform led by China and Russia has raised eyebrows in European capitals. Of course it has. A second Turkish official told MEE that Turkey is attracted to BRICS because it does not require political or economic commitments or agreements. But the center stage there, I think, is very typical of Turkish policy. In a sense, it's blackmailing the EU. We don't see BRICS as an alternative to NATO or the EU. However, the stalled accession process to the European Union encourages us to explore other economic platforms. At the same time, Turkey, a NATO member state, is looking also towards the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Looking again in the article text, what's interesting here is that Turkish officials are focusing on the Middle Corridor Trade Initiative to transport goods from China to Europe through Turkish states such as Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan, where, of course, Turkey really holds power with Israel. Israel provides up to 70% of Azerbaijani weapons. So this is very interesting in the context, and this is where I would suggest that Turkey is starting to feel very isolated, having really allied itself with NATO, but at the same time keeping a foot in the Russian-China camp. you'll remember in September 2023, Netanyahu going to the UNGA with his new Middle East, which of course is the India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor, which completely bypasses Turkey, so bringing supplies from India through the Gulf states, through occupied Palestine, using some of the ports in Egypt potentially, but it could also isolate the Suez Canal into Europe. And let's have a look in the same article, the India, Middle East, Europe corridor, what we've been saying for some time. It's a counter to China's BRI. It challenges China's Middle East influence. It promotes Middle East stability. We can argue counter to that. Normalized diplomatic relations could lead to improved relations between regional nations, which of course includes Israel and Saudi Arabia, where the US is pushing hard for normalization. Reduced dependence on the Suez Canal, which again is putting pressure on Egypt to come on board with NATO member states and Israel, and expand the G20's role. But let's also have a look at the fact that Turkey perceives the Belt and Road Initiative, the Chinese initiative, as a definite threat to the Turkish economy. And in this article, China aims to deliver products to the rich markets faster, with the European market being one of them. He said, this is the expert that was talking to Andalu agency. Today, an average delivery time from China to the European market takes 40 to 45 days. In the Belt and Road project, China's goal is to deliver its goods to Europe within a week. What does this mean for us? Our biggest advantage today is logistics. A product leaving Gaziantep can be delivered to any city in Europe within 48 hours. 48 hours is a very serious advantage compared to 45 days. But when it decreases to 1 week, our logistic advantage drops to 5 days. And of course, that is one of the reasons that Turkey was trying to take control of northern areas of Syria in Erdogan's neo-Ottoman empire ambitions, because of course that's where the Belt and Road Initiative will run, through Iraq into northern Syria to the East Mediterranean coast and then to Europe. So very much, I think Turkey is feeling extremely isolated right now, and we're going to potentially see a change in policy, but I would always not entirely trust Erdogan's agenda.
Thank you, Vanessa. Now let's come on to Ukraine. And well, first of all, the issue of so-called disinformation, and yet another website has been set up with a hit list on it. So let's bring it on screen here. This is texty.org.ua. It is in Ukrainian, but it also is in English. And they're talking about a roller coaster from Trumpists to communists, the forces in the US impeding aid to Ukraine and how they do it. And they've got all kinds of nice little graphics. They're highlighting 388 individuals, 76 organizations. On their list, they say these include politicians, political movements and groups, media and journalists, experts and think tanks. Some individuals appear in multiple categories. And as you scroll down through this, it's got lots of little graphics and network diagrams and so on. Jordan Peterson's on the list. So he leads, he's the first photograph on the list. But we have, here's one of their diagrams. Tucker Carlson is fans and interviewees. So they've got a network diagram showing all those. And as you hover your mouse over each of those dots, you get a name. And who is next? Code Pink and other peace activists are on here. So all kinds of people there. Then the next lot on the list is RT and the Grey Zone, contributors and partners. Ron Paul is on there. So they've got a nice picture of Ron Paul, so you don't make sure you know who he is. Ron Paul is a frequent guest on Russian state TV channel RT, where he comments on events in the USA, Ukraine, and the world from a pro-Russian perspective, is what they're claiming. And then we have what's next, conservatives and isolationists. Donald Trump, of course, is in this. Charles Koch, the American conservative, Cato Institute, all these types of people. And then we have conspiracy theorists, propagandists, and Russians. So conspiracy theorists like Alex Jones, propagandists and so on, like Veterans Today is how they're describing it. But I just thought we did put a quote on here. Another contributor, Patrick Henningsen, is an assistant editor at InfoWars. Well, that's a lie for a start. Patrick was at InfoWars for all of about 2 weeks. It was a little bit longer than that, but it wasn't very long at all, and it was many, many years ago. He is now the editor-in-chief, they say, of 21stCenturyWire.com. The website describes itself as an independent hyperblog that delivers bold news. It publishes numerous conspiracy theories about the New World Order, quotes Russian ideologue Alexander Dugin, denies the Holocaust, pretty sure it doesn't do that, and of course spreads almost all the craziest Russian fakes about Ukraine, such as no Ukraine existed before 1991 and Ukraine organized genocide in Donbass. So that is the latest. Now there's a list which is just another list to go with the other 2 or 3 Ukrainian hit lists out there. But in the meantime, the United States and Poland have announced a new Ukraine communications group, also to deal with disinformation from Russia and from Russian operatives. And this has resulted in a report on how Ukraine fights disinformation. They're calling this Beehive versus Mammoth. So this is NATO's European Centre of Excellence for Countering Hybrid Threats has published this document to go alongside with the announcement with Poland. So this is all about dealing with Russian disinformation. So looking at the State Department comment here, they're saying representatives from participating countries will begin collaborating in person to support Ukraine's independence, sovereignty and territorial integrity through collaborative efforts to counter disinformation and support fact-based reporting. They say the UCG is designed to counter these deceptive narratives and reinforce honest coverage of Ukraine's resilience and bravery in the face of Russia's aggression. I'm sure everybody can see the irony in all of that. Which brings us on to this. And so let's look at this in Ukrainian first, and then look at a translation of it also in AA. So EU should begin membership talks with Ukraine in June, according to Ursula von der Leyen. They are very worried at the potential that Orban takes the presidency of the European Council. And so they need to get this moving before that happens in July. So EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says Ukraine has fulfilled all the steps to join the European Union. So that's good news, isn't it? And then finally on this issue, the US has lifted its weapons ban, according to the Washington Post, on the Azov Brigade. So the Azov Brigades have been brought into the mainstream Ukrainian military. This is the decision was made, they say, following a State Department review of the Azov Brigade, a one-time militia, now part of Ukraine's National Guard. No mention of the word Nazi in this particular piece of journalism, but there you go. They are now entitled to use US weapons along with everybody else in the Ukrainian military. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that briefly.
Well, I mean, like a lot of what's been reported this afternoon, I mean, it just sort of smacks of desperation and a narrative that's completely adrift. But I mean, like we continue to say all the time, this is an information war, and what information is put out there does matter, because the vast majority of people do believe what they're told.
Yes. Okay, well, Charles, let's come on to if we were talking about farming earlier on, let's come on to the sea.
Yeah, absolutely. We have spent a lot of time discussing land use, but we will look at the sea today, and we'll start with news from the government of Iceland from yesterday, that they've issued license for the hunting of fin whales. Now, I don't put this up with necessarily a judgment on the particular story itself, but I do use it to highlight the incredible contradictions that exist within the sort of European sphere and the Western power bloc. So hunting of fin whales, the license is valid for the 24 hunting season, permitting the hunting of 99 whales in Greenland and West Iceland, totaling 128 whales. But they talk about this, which obviously was sort of unexpected, because it was predicted that Iceland would not renew this license. But they say that it aligns with the Marine and Freshwater Research Institute's 2017 advice and considers the conservative ecosystem factors of the International Whaling Commission. Worth pointing out, of course, that Iceland is not actually a member of the International Whaling Commission, but nonetheless, they then rather extraordinarily go on to say it is based on a precautionary approach and reflects the government's increased emphasis on the sustainable use of resources. They don't make it clear at all how the hunting of 128 whales does that, but an interesting application of the precautionary approach, or the precautionary principle, which of course we have spoken about with regard to so many other things in recent times. So we look at now the European Commission. Of course, Iceland is not a member of the European Union and therefore does not fall under the sort of auspices of the European Commission. Nonetheless, they have a policy on international whaling to do with the protection of such creatures. So the EU has adopted measures to protect cetaceans against hunting, capture and captivity, and also against deliberate disturbance. Now, at a time where Europe is very much pushing for Ukrainian membership of the European Union, where NATO and indeed the European Union are pushing for war with Russia, it is pertinent to mention Exercise Joint Warrior, which happens in British waters almost exclusively twice a year. And here we have from the Hebridean Whale and Dolphin Trust a piece about Exercise Joint Warrior and their long-standing concerns about the impact that the exercise has on cetaceans. And we question how Europe's largest military exercises are allowed to take place within and near to protected areas, specifically designated to protect Scottish cetaceans and known cetacean hotspots. And they go on specifically to talk about sonar. Military sonar used during these operations produces an intense loud noise that can cause injury, death, and mass strandings of cetaceans, as well as widespread disturbance. Of course, exactly the disturbance that the European Commission is trying to avoid, apparently. This can be sort of confirmed to a certain extent by Forces Net, which from 2020 talk about whales beginning to be herded back to the sea ahead of Exercise Joint Warrior. Exactly how that's going to be done is slightly unclear, but nonetheless, there are these raft of contradictions. And of course, this is set against the backdrop of the Sustainable Markets Initiative and the Terra Carta putting forward that 30 by 30, meaning that 30% of the not just the land, but also coastal areas will be in nature recovery by the year 2030. So that's worth mentioning, particularly when we look at how the government are sort of spinning the fisheries story at the moment. And in April, they announced that there are fishing opportunities worth over £970 million secured for this year. They go on to effectively paint a picture that since leaving the European Union, things have looked up, and they talked about securing an increase of 61,000 tonnes, which is an increase of 9%, and approximately £53 million in fishing opportunities. Now, use of the word opportunities is, of course, somewhat disingenuous, because in actual fact, the reality of it seems that things for fisheries and those involved in the economy and the fishing trade have not been good. Here we have from Fishing Daily the very recent announcement that Plymouth trawler agents announced the cessation of trading. And that means that people who were bringing fish into Plymouth, which of course they'd had to do certainly after the closure of other fish markets, are now forced to either go to Newlyn or Brixham, which puts a massive strain on the infrastructure, but also has a very, very obvious effect of increasing the cost for those doing this, but also therefore for the purchaser of the fish in the sort of last instance. And then we look at the Fisheries and Seafood Scheme, which does give us an indication of the sort of perhaps the desperation within the industry, within the economy. So their update from Monday is that the Fisheries and Seafood Scheme, which was there to support fisheries, has closed for applications. And they say that since reopening, the scheme has once again proven popular with industry, generating a record-breaking number of applications in just 3 months. Given the number and value of applications we have received, the scheme is now closed to new applications. So we've talked quite a lot about food security, but of course we mustn't forget that, especially for an island nation, food security does not just involve the activities on the land, but also in the seas. And I think this is something that we should concentrate on more. If you, as a viewer or listener, have greater insight into what is going on in fisheries near you, please do get in touch and provide us with any more information or leads that you can.
Thank you, Charles. Now, we will end then with a couple of stories. First of all, from the BBC here, from their weather reporter, Simon King. UK weather, where is summer is the question. And clearly they're getting upset about the fact that global warming isn't happening in the UK this year. We've basically had it raining since September or something, more or less. And even when the sun is shining, if it hides behind a cloud at all, the underlying temperature is clearly very cool. And so people already noticing that summer doesn't seem to be happening this year. Well, they're getting very upset about that and offering all kinds of suggestions as to why that might be. A hint of desperation there, perhaps. But anyway, look, I just wanted to end by highlighting Ned Pamphilon, and he has a Substack. It's called Ned's Substack. Ned, of course, was drawing and painting, lots of illustrations for the UK Column News for quite some time, a number of years ago. He has a Substack where he continues to put out his artwork, and I just thought everybody should get a heads up on that and go and have a look at it and offer Ned a little bit of support if you possibly can. We'll have a little bit more. I'm going to show a couple of the things that Ned produced while I think this one of the ones that we're going to use is from 2018 in Extra and features a very fetching Boris Johnson. So we'll have a bit of fun with that during Extra. If you're a UK Column member, join us for that in a couple of minutes on the members live stream. Otherwise, we'll see you at 1 p.m. as usual on Friday. Don't forget the Andrew Bridgen interview at 1 p.m. tomorrow in the usual places, and we will see you then. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.